Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 14 of Spy Family. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So I seem to recall saying last time that, I kind of have complex feelings about the depictions of violence in this series, because on the one hand, there's occasionally some pretty gratuitous violence, but it's almost always played off cartoonishly. And I feel like if ever there was an episode with a lot of violence, I'm fairly certain it's going to be this one, for reasons we'll get into eventually. So things are still in a rather tenuous spot. The bomb plot is still ongoing and not, fully in hand. But on the plus side, Anya, who has knowledge of what's going on, has been rescued from what would surely have been a grisly death. And this Keith character seems to think that, perhaps he could still kill all involved, but he doesn't realize he's aggressing on an assassin here. So it seems like Yor is maybe starting to learn a little bit, if there's dangerous stuff going on, I can't just leave Anya on her own, Somebody needs to watch her, and in this case, it's me. I'm kind of glad that she's not taking matters into her own hands and just sort of killing people willy-nilly. I mean, she certainly could do it, and she could maybe even get away with it, but despite being an assassin, I think generally that Yor is a good person and that, killing wantonly is not something she would necessarily do. I don't know, we haven't seen much of her and her association with, I believe it was called the Flower Garden. But I don't know. It seems to me that they have some sort of guiding principle, and they're not just people who kill for the sake of it. I do think it's fairly remarkable that Anya is as put together as she is, considering that she's both a child and went through something that was pretty harrowing. Obviously she's sort of smarter than your average kid, and it certainly doesn't help that she has telepathic powers, but at the same time, I can't imagine I'd be in very good shape if I was her age and this sort of thing had happened. Now, speaking of bad things, here's the crux of the episode. The dog, who is demonstrated to be able to read the future and see what happens, he has foreseen that the bomb goes off and Lloyd gets caught up in the explosion. So naturally, this is very bad, both on a personal level for Anya and, well, for the country as a whole. Now, speaking of violence, I do recall from reading the manga that this horrific future was depicted with a good deal more violence, you know. There's like an actual rather gruesome shot of Lloyd dead and bleeding out under a pile of rubble, and what we saw was still rather bleak, but it wasn't quite on the same level. I wonder if they're just sort of shying away from violence in general. So this, in my mind, is one of the shining moments of the series so far. It almost puts me in mind of Chrono Trigger in a weird sort of way, in that a child has been made aware of a horrible future that will beset everything, and despite the seeming inevitability, she decides that she will not let the future come to pass and will do everything in her power to change it. And I guess just from a physicist's perspective, if you know what the future's going to be, there's no real, reason to believe that you can change it. You know, if you're seeing what has already happened, then perhaps it can't be changed. I mean, this is way over Anya's head, obviously. She wouldn't be thinking about this, but that she would be so eager to try and effect change, I think reflects positively on her. So now it seems like Lloyd's handler and the rest of, Wise, I believe they're called, they're finally getting off their butts and putting in some work here. You know, Alpha Team has captured a fair few people, along with the dogs and explosives. Bravo Team has done the same. So, while they are doing an admirable job of mopping things up, you know, the ringleader, Keith here, is still at large. And worse yet, he seems to know that people are starting to get onto him, so I'd imagine he'd be pretty desperate to make sure everything goes off, I guess, as well as possible given the circumstances. So unfortunately for the wise interrogators here, they're dealing with zealots who aren't liable to betray their cause, as it were. You know, it is very interesting that one of these guys proclaims that he wants a war. You know, that's generally not something sane people want. You know, you have to be pretty unhinged to invite armed conflict. And Mrs. Handler here is making a pretty good point, you know. What sort of violence have you guys ever encountered in your life? Have you ever lost a limb or been maimed or mangled? Have you ever killed anyone? A lot of this stuff is easy to talk about, but very, very difficult to witness, perform, or endure. You know, it seems like, at the very least, Mrs. Handler here has witnessed a fair bit of the horrors of war, and she is definitely unwilling to see war happen again. You know, that really changes the atmosphere of everything, because these guys just seem like a bunch of, if not punk kids, punk young adults. So, you know, I don't think they really truly have a grasp on what exactly they're getting into. And, you know, I'd imagine, given that Wise is sort of like a stand-in for three-letter agencies, You know, I feel like they could get away with just sort of killing all those people and nobody would ask too many questions. I mean, that might take the story into much darker territory than the author is perhaps intending or wants to venture into. But I mean, we're already dealing with a bomb plot where the future as it is now suggests that Lloyd does not survive. You know, if nothing else, I'd say that's pretty grim. So we're starting to get little hints here and there about a previous war and how the ramifications of it are still haunting the living. I guess perhaps in a stroke of good luck, given that there's an ambassador visiting, there's already going to be some heightened security. I mean, if the future the dog projected is to be believed, none of that really ends up mattering. But, you know, maybe between that and Anya's efforts, a horrific outcome can be avoided. So, we've got a bit of a dilemma here, because on the one hand, Anya knows that something needs to be done here, but the problem is, she's still a kid and she doesn't really know much. She doesn't really know how to read a clock properly, so she's sort of forced to rely on the help of strangers to read the time, figure out how much time she has to work with. Not that I imagine it'll be very helpful once she knows. You know, I feel like this is still a really good depiction of how children work, because, you know, Anya knows she needs to do something, but a lot of the important parameters are still unknown here. Like, she knows where the bomb is, and when it will go off, at least in theory, but, you know, she can't really read a clock, and I imagine that once she does find the bomb, she's not exactly going to have the requisite skills to disarm it. You know, I'd imagine from watching Bond Man, she knows, you know, I gotta cut the red wire or whatever, but why would a terrorist use nice color coding? You know, they're not exactly working within the electrical codes for wiring up a bomb. And furthermore, I doubt bombs would be covered in the National Electric Codes either. Alright, so the plot thickens. It seems like this guy's sort of given up on the main plan, and he's just sort of set a little impromptu booby trap. The idea being, once the secret agents raid his hideout, they set off the bomb. Yeah, I mean, this guy's talking about necessary sacrifices as a euphemism for human life. I think that if innocent bystanders get caught up in something you don't need to do because you think it's the right thing to do, like, you're venturing down a bad path. Like, none of this really needed to be done. Nobody was forcing your hand, so to catch up innocent people in it is rather reprehensible in my mind. So there we have it. This is in all likelihood the trapped door. Oh dear. Yeah, you know, sometimes kids don't really think either. It's like, man, I'll just open the door and see what's in there, but, you know, that would trigger the bomb. And I guess in a sense, in a morbid way, that would avert the future she saw, but at the same time, that's not really a good outcome either. I'd imagine not many people want to die, in a scenario like this, even if it means saving someone else. Alright, so here we go. Anya, oddly enough, has the presence of mind to put on gloves. Presumably she doesn't want to get her fingerprints all over everything. But at the same time, yeah, there we go. Pick the red wire or the blue wire. You have a 50-50 shot, but all the wires are black. Which one do you cut? And furthermore, she doesn't have scissors either. Not that scissors would really work, I don't think. I think you need actual wire cutters. Yeah, so this is a real pickle Anya finds herself in. Interfering with the bomb will likely set it off. Opening the door will set the bomb off. If she tells people about the bomb, that'll be suspicious. She's gotta actually, use her noggin to get an idea of how to get out of here. So she wrote a little message in tomato ketchup. Not exactly an elegant illustration. It's kind of on par with what I could produce. Now this agent here, he seems to be eager to get himself killed because he's not willing to wait around. Oh dear. So I find it funny that Anya was trying to emulate a message in blood to sort of create an element of foreboding to stop somebody from opening the door. And, with somebody rational, it could very well have worked, but that one agent seemed a little too eager to start opening doors and getting himself killed. I guess at the very least, it's now 5 o'clock and the bomb didn't go off, so surely something good must have happened. Well, there we go. The future is indeed mutable. Lloyd's better instincts came to bear and prevented this guy from opening the door. Because, even though there's a message written in ketchup, that's definitely out of place. And, you really shouldn't rush when there's things like booby traps in play here. Even if you don't know there's a booby trap, it would be a reasonable assumption that these, bomb-making terrorists would have bombs. Perhaps that's a bit reductive. So everything seems to be mostly resolved, except for Keith. He's still on the loose. So I feel like Lloyd is foreshadowing a little bit. Keith's plan is in shambles, but he hasn't been caught, so he could very well try something desperate here. Hint, hint, hint. So now we're seeing Yuri again here. We know that he's a member of the secret police, so I think we can readily assume here that they're aware that something's going on here. So the minister here has decided he's going to take his car by himself without security, and nobody really stopped him. Boy, isn't that interesting. So as it turns out, I think it's reasonable to assume here that this is Lloyd's doing, and he's doing it deliberately to dry out Keith. Man, the gall of Twilight to just sort of show up apparently rob the minister and proceed with his plan. I mean, I guess they needed to do it to ensure things go off well, but yeah, like, I'd imagine that would cause an international incident or something. Oh man, so in a way, this is Lloyd getting a leg up on Yuri again. Because Yuri was supposed to be part of a security detail, and he just sort of veers off course, makes him look, I guess, kind of foolish. I'd imagine his superiors are going to be none too happy about this, even if it does end up alright. Now, this scene isn't that bad in terms of the CG being used. Like, it's not super ugly to look at, but, I don't know. I feel like drawing cars isn't that big a deal. Like, maybe in a situation like this where windshields are being shot out and, like, this sort of dynamic driving that's going on, but, like, I feel like it wouldn't be too much of an ask to just sort of draw cars manually rather than create janky 3D models. I don't know. Like, they're not bad objectively, but I feel like there's something about the shading that's not quite gelling with everything else. It's a bit of a nitpick for sure, but I don't know. I think there's a time and a place to mix 2D and 3D, and this, in all likelihood, isn't one of them. Oh dear. Yeah, Lloyd's playing for keeps now. Because on the one hand, he's running away from this dog that has a bomb. And on the other hand, he's got a gun. He could shoot the dog if he gets a good lock on it. Yeah. Man, Lloyd really isn't playing around here. And I'm wondering if they're actually going to show, like, the result. Oh, no. I guess we were spared that. Alright, that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.